at their leisure. All right, so special procedures for poll workers. This is what we're going to cover. A number of different situations that may occur at check-in, which is a critical point of possible disenfranchisement if there's a mistake, point of confusion, or a missing piece of information. That's largely the purpose of these sessions and the poll worker resources that have been developed. And then we're going to go into a little bit of the detail with several special procedures. Provisional voting, folks who've worked the polls are familiar with. Spoiling machine ballots doesn't happen all that often, and we do have fairly new voting systems. This is their third election, and this may happen probably a limited number of times. But then firstly, spoiling absentee and mail-in ballots is a brand new procedure that poll workers new and experienced will have to run through for the first time. And then again, after we get past these procedures, at the end of the session, we'll open this up for any sorts of questions people may have about working the polls on election day. So we're going to reference these resources a lot over the course of the session. You can all find these at wevote.70.org. These are, it's basically a series of guides or tools, checklists that were based on resources that Philadelphia poll workers, several had made on their own, in addition to the official materials, which you can find at philadelphiavotes.com. So on the left-hand side is we're calling it the anatomy of a judge's box. There's a lot of things that come in these boxes for those folks who worked the polls in the past. This guide outlines all those items. We have pictures of them and generally what they're for, and if they need to be posted somewhere where they go inside or outside the polling place. And then on the right-hand side, we've created a series of station cards, and these try to delineate into several different areas or stations the roles or the duties for various poll workers. Now, Philadelphia has 1,703 divisions, 1,703 election boards of poll workers, and surely there are different ways of doing things division by division that work perfectly well. So, these stations are largely suggestions around how you can organize the work. To a point, I mean, the judge of elections in particular, as the chief election board officer at any division, has to do certain things. But these station cards are, again, for the most part, suggested ways of organizing the work among the several poll workers. And we'll be referencing them a good bit. So if you don't have these yet, you can download them at wevote.70.org. We were also able to mail out a bunch of these to those poll workers we were able to track down addresses for. And then we also have a couple thousand here at the office that just arrived the other day for pickup. I guess, Lauren, if you're able to drop into the chat the hours and days for pickup, that'd be great. And that's for folks who, again, didn't happen to receive one at their home. So this is the ground we're covering, the check-in. At the outset, there's going to be a line of voters. It's going to be, a long, probably fairly tense day. I think most voters, as we've seen at the satellite election offices, are very, very intent on casting their ballots and will be there, waiting patiently. But there may be some folks who are kind of frustrated or tired as well. There's definitely a customer service element to this. We're greeting the voters, asking them to announce their name, and then we're going through the poll books. And I'll note again that we're going to go through this stuff, throughout the next a couple dozen slides. But this is just a kind of initial review of the ground. Several poll books. There's an A to M, N to Z, a supplemental poll book. For those who worked the polls before, you've seen these previously. For most voters, there isn't going to be a whole heck of a lot to do. They just have to sign their name in the signature box if there's no message, and they go along on their merry way to use the next available voting machine. But there could be one of several different messages in there. ID required, affirmation required, no signature on file if it's just so happens that the voter's signature cannot be taken off their registration application. That's the note there. They're still allowed to sign and go off and use the voting machine, but sometimes that message is in there. And then there's the new stuff. So remit ballot or vote provisional is for those folks who applied for an absentee or mail-in ballot and have not returned it yet. And we're going to talk about what that means, remit ballot or vote provisional. And then lastly, this wouldn't be a watermark or a message. It would be actually a stamp. And this is happening in Philadelphia. That's where, the other counties may be doing this differently. But in Philadelphia, the poll books that were printed last week are actually being stamped. Today's Wednesday, might be right now and tomorrow. For those voters who have, since the poll books were printed, have returned their ballots, and those stamps will also go in there. Presumably, these would go over and on top of the remit ballot or vote provisional message. And then it's also possible the voters may not be in these books. In that case, there's actually another poll book in the bottom right-hand corner here of folks who have returned their mail-in ballots and therefore would not be able to use the voting machines. And either they're on that list or they're not. And if they're not, they will probably have to vote at provisional. So that's a very, very kind of quick initial rundown of the ground we're going to cover in the following slides. So, with the anatomy of the judges box, resource, the poll books are listed in there. Again, there's one poll book of those voters listed A to L, another one for M to Z, and a third book of those registered voters who have returned their ballots and who are not eligible to vote on the voting machines. So that's a really, really critical point, whether it's in this third poll book that lists those folks who have returned these ballots, if it's in the supplemental poll book pages, it lists voters who have returned their ballots, or if there's a stamp over a voter's signature box that says they've returned their ballot, they are not allowed to use the voting machine. They can vote a provisional ballot if they request it, but they cannot use the voting system. So in addition to those initial several poll books, there are going to be supplemental poll book sheets as well. Really, really important to check these too. And supplemental poll book sheets are created, as you guess, after the original poll books are, if something has changed in the voters' registration record. So if for whatever reason their registration wasn't able to be processed to get into the original poll book, that would be listed here. Or if something else changed, that would be listed. In addition to those folks who return absentee or mail-in ballots after the original poll books printed as well. So, long story short, we're checking all these books to see if we can find the voter's name, and then we figure out what to do with them. So this is really the outline of a flow chart that I think will be most helpful as we go through the following slides, because there are a lot of kind of decision points to potentially make. And actually, at this point, I'll pause just for a second, and I'll ask Lauren and Peggy, are there any kind of questions coming up yet that cover the poll books, or Peggy, any kind of initial thoughts on your experiences at the check-in table that folks should keep in mind looking through the poll book?
No, it's pretty straightforward looking through the poll book, and this is a good flow chart.
Yeah, this is a perfect example of this is something that a Philadelphia poll worker created on their own, and just with a little bit of help and some funding, we were able to spruce it up. So experienced poll workers have gone through some variety of these steps before, but certainly for folks that are brand new to this, it can be a little bit daunting. And then there are some new steps too. So this is what we're going to be walking through this afternoon, starting with the top of the decision tree. So as we just noted, a voter comes in. You greet them, they announce their name. We're checking to see if they are in the A to L, M to Z poll book or in the supplemental poll book sheets. If they are not, that's going to bring us off to the left-hand side of the chart. And then we're looking to see if the voter's name is listed in the ballot returned or ballot cast not eligible to vote poll book. So again, what this means is they're not eligible to vote on the voting machine. If they were to request a provisional, they could still do that, but that's what that left-hand side of the chart is. On the right-hand side, if you do find their name in the A to L, M to Z, or supplemental poll book pages, you're going to be checking to see if there's any sort of message in the voter signature box. And if there is, that would mean that there are some additional steps to take. Which brings us to our first situation, additional steps to take for a voter whose name is listed and there's a message. So again, most voters will not have any message at all in their signature box. They just have to sign, and then they can move right along. But for others, there could be one of several messages. ID required, which is for someone who was voting for the very first time in their division. They've just turned 18 and they registered. They're a naturalized citizen and they registered. They've moved into this division for this, and this is their first election. Any of those folks would have to show an approved form of photo or non-photo ID. There's a laundry list of IDs that are acceptable. They're listed on PhiladelphiaVotes.com, votespa.com. The city or the state websites list them. They're also listed in the poll worker resources that we produced as well. But generally that ID requirement is not an issue because there's a laundry list of acceptable IDs that can be used. Another message that can show up is affirmation required. And this comes up, and this is probably a little bit more frequent one in a presidential general, because more folks are coming out to vote who probably haven't been in the polls in a little while. And the affirmation is necessary for someone whose voter registration has become inactive because they have not been to the polls in a certain number of years. So it's simply a form that has to be filled out. They do that, they sign the poll book, and they go on their way and use a voting machine. Sometimes it's a combination of those two things. Affirmation is required because it's an inactive record, and they need to show ID. And then lastly, there's a question about whether or not voter assistance is permitted. So the assistance is actually not marked as a message, but actually a little checkbox. And if the box is checked, the person coming with them to assist them can go on and use the voting, go on through the voting process and use the voting machine. If they haven't, there's a declaration that has to be signed both by the voter, the person assisting them, and the judge of elections. So if you're going through these slides at home, you would you maybe do a quick mental check, 30 seconds, like, what do you do in each of these steps? We're going to go ahead and just take a closer look at the first steps of the check-in procedure that we put together in the resources. So, right, number one is greet the voter. At least in Philadelphia, this is probably true in the other counties. I can't confirm that with certainty, but in Philadelphia, this is definitely the case. Every voter will be given a glove. Ask the voter to announce their name loudly, slowly, clearly. It could be more difficult, especially with masks on. I'm going to skip step number 3 just for a moment. I'll come back to it. Step number 4 is to locate the voter in the poll books, right, and see if a message is there. If ID is required, verify the ID, approved form of photo or non-photo ID. If affirmation is required, they have to fill out the affirmation of elector form. If assistance is required and the assistance box is not checked, again, there's a declaration that the person assisting, and the judge of elections have to sign. So all those should be pretty straightforward, and also critically should not take very long to get the voter through so they can use the voting machines. So this takes us back to step number 3 here, locate the voter's admission slip and voter number. So we just learned last week that the voter admission slips are not going to be available. They will not be in the judges' boxes. The vendor went out of business, very recently, bad timing. So for those folks who have worked the polls in Philadelphia before, these slips will not be available, and you may go looking for them. So this is a last minute issue, and it requires a last minute solution. There are a number of workarounds that I think that they would do the trick. The Poll Worker Caucus Facebook group, there's a lot of chatter already in that space around how to do this. But just for example, you could have whether it's a note card, a piece of scrap paper, sticky notes, that either the person on the poll worker on the poll books writes the voter's name down on those slips and hands that over to the person who's overseeing the number 2 and number 4 books, which I should emphasize. What these slips have been used for in past elections and past years is to communicate to the person overseeing the number 2 and the number 4 books. It's usually the clerk, the voter's name, so their names can be handwritten in those books. The number 2 and number 4 books are simply additional records of the people who vote in person at the polling place. So that's all the slip is for, that bit of communication. So the officially produced slips in past elections had all the voters' information on it, including their name being printed. The reason why a piece of paper, sticky note card would be helpful is because of spelling. I mean, to have the voter announce their name and the person on the number 2, number 4 books having to write the person's name in those books, just hearing it would clearly be challenging at times. So that's why one solution is have the judge of elections or the inspector, whoever's on the poll books, write the voter's name down. Another way to do this, and perhaps an even better way, is to have the voters, if they can be given sticky notes, and if they have pens available, if they can be given pens and have those pens cleaned in between voters, they can write their names down, and then that piece of paper or sticky note is handed to the clerk, and the clerk uses that to write their name into the book. So I'm going to pause there again for a moment, because I know this is a new issue, and for those folks who it probably will be more complicated for those folks who have worked the polls in the past and those folks who are new. So again, Lauren and Peggy, are we seeing any kind of questions coming up yet around that issue, or on this one? Peggy, is this something that has kind of drawn your attention in the past, this admission slip?
This is new and very surprising for me, because the admission slip is a very helpful step in keeping the Yellow Book 2 and 4 straight. And I like your suggestion of having the voter write down their name. It will be spelled correctly, and then the 2 registrars will probably be busy with voters. And so if that voter can write it down and then give it to the clerk, who can then put it in the roll books, I think that's a really good system. That's my gut.
Yeah, and Peggy, whether it was on the voter admission slips that were actually printed before, or on these little on a sticky note or note card or whatever, we would also be writing the voter's number down on that piece of paper as well, because that gets noted in those number 2, number 4 books as well, right? First voter there,
Yes.
second voter there, 100th voter there.
That sequence is very important, and you write that number where they sign the registration book. So make sure that that's the number that's on their little slip or index card that we'll add, and then that's the number in the sequence in the roll book that we write for the committee people.
Yeah. Yeah. So not a complicated process, but it's therefore don't need a complicated solution, but this is a last minute issue that's come up. And therefore we're trying to figure out these last minute hacks or workarounds to figure them out. So again, we went through that very quickly. The poll worker caucus on the Facebook group is a great place to go, where there's already a lot of chatter around this issue and others that have come up. And a lot of folks in that Facebook group are in Philly, but plenty of others are from other counties around the region. So the back to the judges box anatomy, these are the items that we were just referring to on the left-hand side there, that yellow number 2 and number 4 book, where again, it's usually a clerk is recording voters' names, by hand, and their number, the voter number. Below that is the elector affirmation form, those folks who have been inactive. On the right-hand side towards the top is a record of those voters who got assistance, where the voter's name and the person assisting them has to be noted down. And then just below that is the assistance declaration. So, it's actually, it's fairly common for someone to have to and want to bring someone with them to assist them in the polls. It does have to be for a specific, a reason, if they have a disability or limited English proficiency. You can't just have someone who just wants to bring their friend with them and to assist. This is, largely, at least I tend to think this is one of the best ways that someone in one of those situations could get help, because you're bringing someone into the polling place with you, where sometimes it can be just a little tense, little uncomfortable, and you'll have kind of an ally at your hip to go with you through the voting process. So we're going to keep moving along here to situation 2. Still a lot of ground to cover within the hour. So this is where the voter is not in any of the poll books, which, when this happens, it can cause some angst, and it shouldn't, because it does happen sometimes. But there are a series of steps to follow. Again, if you're doing this at home, take a quick 30 seconds, a mental map of what you do. But we're going to move along by using the flow chart. So starting at the top, right, is the voter in the A to L book, the M to Z book, or the supplemental poll book pages? No. We move over to the left-hand side. Is the voter's name listed in the ballot returned, not eligible to vote on the voting machine poll book? Answer is no. That brings us into search for the voter registration status. Now, here it might be advisable to go ahead and just double check the poll books, double check the supplemental sheets. It's possible it got missed, possible that the sheets got stuck together, and check there first, because we really, one of the kind of principles I've heard a couple other poll workers stress is we want to maximize the number of people who are voting in their correct division and on the voting machine, and minimize the number of people who are voting by provisional ballot. We want every registered voter to cast a ballot one way or another on election day, but that's really the kind of principle we're going for. And the easier the solution is, the better. So that's why I would recommend that check first.
Pat, let me jump in here for a second.
Yeah, please.
Most often the reason is they're at the wrong polling place, and they should be a block over or 2 blocks up. So it's helpful to have a map of divisions, and I think the Inquirer publishes one close to election day, so that you can just direct them to their proper polling place. That's been the number 1 reason. So check that.
100%. And sometimes it's not even like in another building, another location. It could be another division, like across the gymnasium, right across the space. Like they just ended up in the wrong line, but they're at the right physical location. So that is definitely like Peggy noted, like the number 1 reason why someone's not shown up in the book. But you look through the books of your division, right? You can't find them, so you can check both their registration and their polling place location. So this QR code tool is one of the resources that's been produced. You can use this tool, of course. Voters in line can use this tool. I think it'd be recommended to post this tool up inside the polling place, outside the polling place. If someone's working the lines, I recommend that folks double check this before they get up to the polls. If you find that the voter's not registered, though, if you can't locate their registration record online using the state's voter services tools, and you can't get a hold of the county election office, so I think the fact of the matter is probably going to be whether it's in Philadelphia County or any of the surrounding counties, the phone lines are going to be very, very busy. And if you can't find the voter's registration record online using the online tools, they're going to have to go ahead and vote a provisional ballot. But if you find that they are registered, the next thing to do is to check if they're right location, like Peggy just noted. So you can use the QR code tool again. If they are at the right location, if they're at the right division, they are registered, but you can't find them anywhere in the poll books, they need to vote a provisional ballot. Don't let that person turn around and go home without casting a provisional. When they do that, if they are registered, if they are in fact registered, local election officials will see that on the back end and they will count the provisional ballot. And that was if, for whatever reason, the voter's name was not showing up in any of these books. So that's really, really important.
Hey,
if they're not at the right polling place and they're not in the right division, as Peggy noted, like this is at the bottom of the decision tree, but this is like the #1 reason why people are not showing up in poll books. Do direct them to the right division and the right polling place. So we have 1,703 divisions in Philadelphia, consolidated into 718 physical polling places. So pretty much every polling place is going to have multiple divisions at the location. Most likely the issue is they are in the wrong line for the wrong division. They need to go to one of the other divisions, one of the other lines at the polling place location. If they're at the wrong site entirely, they really should try to get to the other location. Hopefully it's just a few blocks away. If it's farther, like you should really advise the voter to try to get there, because again, we're trying to maximize the number of people who are using the voting machines. If they're at the wrong division and polling place and it's outside of a legislative district or congressional district that they live in, provisional votes that they cast outside those districts are not gonna count. So those are the reasons why you really want to try to get that person back to their own polling place in their own division if they can. If they're unable to for whatever reason, or they just won't, they can cast a provisional ballot at your division.
Hey, Pat, can we jump in? We've got a couple of
please.
specific
Let's pause
questions.
There again.
Yeah, about this part of the process. So Beth asks, if a person gets assistance and is checked in the poll book, do they still need to be recorded on the assistance log sheet?
That's a good question. I was pretty sure that they are supposed to go in that record, that list. Peggy, do you have any idea on that? If not, we might have to confirm that answer and get back.
I don't. You'll have to get back to people.
Okay.
Okay. And then can you clarify what it means by MI and AB in the back of the yellow books? Is that for spoiled ballots who also sign the poll book, or is that if they have to do a provisional ballot for that reason?
MI and LB?
AB.
I'm trying to remember.
MI and AB.
If they spoil MI, mail-in. That must be mail-in ballot.
AB is I'm sorry to jump in here. AB is absentee ballot. It means that they had requested an absentee ballot, and MI is mail-in, that they have been listed as someone who mailed in their ballot. So for either of those, they will not be able to vote unless they present and render the ballot.
Correct.
Right, and they won't be in the book, right? They're going to be, if they submitted their mail-in and absentee in the back of the yellow books. I'm sorry, I'm confusing myself. Never mind. I'll be quiet. About who's right, because isn't there?
If they show up and they turn in their ballot, then they would get a sequence number for having voted on the machine.
Right, but where would you find their name when you're checking them in?
It would still. Wouldn't it be in the registration book but be listed as MI?
I believe it would. If someone has requested their absentee or mail-in ballot, what'll be listed in one of the books, whether it's the A to L, the N to Z poll book, or the supplemental poll book pages, it's going to say ballot remit or vote provisional. So those voters will be listed in those books.
Right.
Yeah.
Did that answer your question?
I hope so. That was fast.
Yeah, I'll flag the poll worker caucus again. They're all sorts of crowdsourced answers to the hundreds of questions that have come up over the past several months. So yeah, Lauren, does it look like there are any others coming up on the ground we covered so far?
There's another question that says, what is the need for the date of birth on the admission slip? Does junior or senior need to be accurate for the 2 and 4 books?
I don't think so. Peggy would welcome your thoughts on this. I mean, from what I've heard, frankly, from election officials, like the number 2 and number 4 books are required by law, but are kind of like an antiquated piece of our election system and are not critical. Now, they can sometimes get reviewed by election officials, but that's why, I mean, there's handwriting issues, and sometimes there are kind of discrepancies in there, but the poll books have to be 100% on point. But I don't think junior or senior notations are going to be critical. But yeah, Peggy would welcome your thoughts on this. I mean, you want to get as accurate as you can.
I guess because I am a little antiquated, we always strove for accuracy when we wrote that down and would have it match their exact registration, whether they were junior or the second. Yeah, but listen, there's going to be a time constraint. I think this will be very different from any of the other elections I've ever done. So do what you can. And what it's very good in terms of keeping count that the sequence number you're on and you have the right number of voters registered, so that 110 people have voted and there is a count of 110 on the machines. Mm-hmm. It helps as backup so that you never have a situation where there are 112 people who have come and there are 109 votes that have been cast on the machine.
Yes, absolutely.
There's another question that just wanted a clarification. Did you say a provisional ballot cast in another division will not be counted?
So what will happen is if a provisional ballot is cast, if someone casts a provisional ballot at a division that is not theirs, and that division is outside of their own legislative district, so state house district, state senate district, or outside their own congressional district, the provisional ballot that they're going to get at that other site is not going to have the office and the candidates that they would otherwise vote for in their home division. So any votes that they cast for those candidates are not going to count wherever that is. Now, votes that they cast for the statewide row offices, treasurer, attorney general, auditor general, like those would count. Any votes that they cast for presidential candidates would count. But that would be the difference there, is that you get a provisional ballot at that other division that would be specific to that division and whatever political districts that division is within.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Here we'll keep plowing along here. So situation number 3. The voters in the ballot return list, which we've already noted several times. So again, there's going to be a poll book of all the voters who've returned their absentee or mail-in ballots, and then in the supplemental poll book sheets, there's going to be broken up into 2 sections. One section that has voters with various messages or watermarks we talked about earlier, and then also a component or section that lists as well in the supplemental sheets those folks that have returned ballots. But wherever it's noted, supplemental sheets. In the ballot returned or cast poll book, if it's stamped into the A to L or M to Z poll book. I heard another poll worker refer to this book and these sheets as the book of reassurance. You can let that voter know that their absentee or mail-in ballot was returned, and presumably they completed it properly. It will be counted. Now, at the same time, there will certainly be some number of voters across the city, across the region, who are going to show up at a polling place and they've returned their absentee or mail-in ballot. They put it in the mail or they've returned it in person, but they show up on election day because they're anxious that either it wasn't received or that they made a mistake in completing it. So maybe they think they submitted it without the secrecy envelope, it's naked, or that they did not sign the outside declaration envelope. If a voter shows up and they believe that they submitted a flawed mail-in ballot or absentee ballot that may not be counted and they want to vote a provisional ballot, you give them the provisional ballot. And what's going to happen on the back end is if election officials receive from Pat Christmas a mail-in ballot, but there was a mistake with it and they got to reject it, but Pat Christmas showed up on election day and voted provisional, the provisional ballot should be counted. If I submitted both a mail-in ballot that was good to go and I voted provisional on election day, election officials are going to see that and they're going to set aside the provisional ballot. So I raise that instance because this is a new procedure. We have literally hundreds of thousands of people just within the city of Philadelphia, hundreds of thousands of folks across the region who are voting by mail for the first time. Most of those folks, a vast majority of them will be staying home because their ballots got returned, but a decent number of them will be showing up at polling places as well, most of whom probably have not returned their mail-in ballots, but a few folks have. Okay. All right. So situation 4, mail-in voter remit ballot message. So this means, again, the voter has requested their absentee or mail-in ballot, but has not yet been returned by the Board of Elections. You know, I've been saying absentee and mail-in ballot for your purposes on election day as a poll worker, doesn't matter either way. Absentee, mail-in ballots, it's the same thing. So if they wish to vote in person, and they can surrender both the ballot and the declaration envelope, those are going to be spoiled, and then they can vote on the voting machine. And again, in our station cards, there's a card in particular that outlines the steps there. If they do not have the mail-in ballot, or they did not bring the declaration envelope, they're going to have to vote a provisional ballot. They need to bring in both those things. Those, of all the things that are in the ballot pack, because there's also in the city of Philadelphia the ballot questions and summaries. There's a ballot instruction card. The ballot needs to be voided for obvious reasons, but the declaration envelope also has to be voided or spoiled because there's a barcode on that envelope that's specific to that voter and can't be kind of loose out there in the world. So both those things need to be voided. The ballot can be marked or unmarked. The election code is silent on this matter. It doesn't say anything about marked or unmarked ballots. So if the voter completed the ballot, they want to void it, that's fine. If they completed half of it, that's fine. If it's a completely clean and empty ballot, that's fine, and they can spoil that too. And then this will also, I'm sure, be the case at some number of polling places. If folks show up who want to return their absentee or mail-in ballot, they've completed it, it's in the declaration envelope, they signed the outside, they're just trying to drop it off. You cannot accept that at your polling place. They will have to get themselves to a satellite election office or a drop box before 8 o'clock on election day, on November 3rd. So Philadelphia has 17 election offices open right now. They'll be open through 8 o'clock. They're right now issuing, because the deadline to apply for absentee or mail-in ballots was yesterday at 5 o'clock. They're open right now to issue replacement ballots for those folks who did not receive their ballots in the mail, and they're serving as drop-off locations. So the 17 sites in Philly, folks can get to, and then there are at least 11 drop-box locations right now, and there could be, I heard maybe a couple more before the end of the day. It would not be advisable at all for someone to put their ballot in the mail on election day. The U.S. Postal Service advised voters in pretty much every state that if they're going to put their ballot in the mail, they need to do so, or they really should do so no later than 7 days before the election, which was yesterday. And surely on November 3rd, folks should not be putting their ballots in the mail. There's still a chance that the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's decision around returning mail-in ballots being postmarked on the 3rd and received and counted if in by the Friday the 6th, there's still a chance that that could be rolled back. So if folks need to drop off their ballots on election day, again, they need to do it in person. They have to do it by 8 o'clock. And the surrounding counties also have multiple election offices, and they should have drop boxes available too. So in the decision tree, again, this is one of the messages that could show up in that A to L N to Z poll book, or in the first section of the supplemental poll book sheets. It's going to say, probably, I don't think it's going to say vote provisional or remit ballot. It's going to say remit ballot or vote provisional. If they brought in both the ballot and the declaration envelope, if the answer is yes, they go over to the judge's area. The judge of elections is the person doing this. They got to spoil the ballot, and then that person can be allowed to use the voting machine. If the answer is no, they have to vote a provisional ballot. So, these are the steps we'll walk through real quick, and then we'll pause again for questions. So I'm starting with number 1 here. Voter gives the paper ballot and the declaration envelope to the judge. Again, the ballot can be marked or unmarked. The judge is going to place a spoiled ballot sticker on both the ballot and the front side of the declaration envelope. Then there's a form to sign. So the voter is going to sign the front side of it's called the elector's declaration to surrender their mail ballot form. Kind of a mouthful there. And then the judge of elections is going to sign the back. And then the spoiled ballot, the spoiled declaration envelope, and that form will be placed into a special surrender mail-in ballot envelope. After all that happens, then the voter is allowed to check in. A little ballot remitted checkbox can be marked off. They're going to sign their name and go off and use the voting machine. So, this is the reason why 70 other voting rights advocates, local and state election officials are urging people, pleading with people not to show up on election day, just because they've decided they'd rather vote on the voting machine instead of voting by mail-in ballot. This procedure has to be overseen by the judge of elections, who will also be responsible for overseeing provisional ballots. And this is what's really going to jam up and lengthen lines if we have people who are unnecessarily showing up to spoil their mail-in ballots just because they decided they preferred to use the voting machine instead. Realize like there's a tremendous amount of angst and actually just like a lot of noise and disinformation around mail-in ballots. But if you complete the steps carefully, you use the secret envelope, you sign the outside, you complete those ovals, with black or blue pen, nice, clean, full ovals, you get it in timely, like your ballot's going to be okay. So I'll pause here again for questions because this is a new procedure that's for both new and experienced poll workers. So any questions coming in, and then also like Peggy, any things like that strikes you about what might kind of cause hiccups in this?
Yeah, Pat, if I could jump in, Lauren. We've got some questions in the Q&A asking if the secrecy envelope is needed to surrender. And the answer to that is no.
Correct, not needed.
You do not need that. If somebody tries to return the declaration and the envelope, it's sealed, right? Like the ballot is sealed inside the declaration envelope. They're going to have to open that, correct?
Correct.
Right. To spoil it. And then somebody asked, can you please confirm what is the front of the envelope? Is that the mailing side or the signature side?
It should be the, you know what, I was about to say the mailing side, but I feel like I want to double check that. It's a good question. We'll mark that down. I'll double check that.
Okay.
Yeah. For what it's worth, there have been so many questions just this year about how these elections work. Folks trying to figure this out on a daily basis, not just advocates, but local and state officials as well, are routinely hearing new questions and getting them answered. So that's a great question, and we'll confirm that. Okay.
Another question, is there anything the clerk or other positions do in the process? Or is it only the judge of elections that has to do it?
This is the judge of elections who oversees this bit of the process. I mean, the two inspectors, a majority and minority inspector, which are, I think, usually on top of the poll books there. The clerk sometimes or oftentimes on the number 2, number 4 books, and then obviously the machine inspector is nearby the machines. But this is why the judge of elections will be very, very busy on this election day. But actually, on that point, Peggy, how are things organized in your division when you've done this in the past? I know like there are different variations of organizing the work.
Oh, in the past, that's exactly how it's organized. That's right. The clerks on the yellow books, the inspectors on the, well, one of them is usually the judge. We didn't have so many people at a polling place. But the judge has to do the provisional ballots, the judge, and now I guess it will be all the spoiled ballots for mail-ins, etc. All I can say is detach, relax, breathe, and go through all of these steps that sound very clear. It's going to be, you just got to keep calm.
That is great advice. That is great advice. I think I'm fairly confident. Like most voters are going to be very, very patient. Everybody wants to vote so badly in this election for one reason or another. But it's going to be a long day, and definitely take your time to go through the steps. That's great advice. That is terrific advice. Okay. I'm sorry. Yeah, Peg, do you have one more thought?
I was just going to say my blood pressure goes up reading some of this.
Well, that's why we're going through it right now. That's why we're going through it right now. I mean, the city has its online trainings at PhiladelphiaVotes.com. The other counties have their online trainings and their materials, but a lot of questions come up, just like the one we heard where we didn't have 100% answer, and that's exactly why we're doing this. Okay, so in the anatomy of a judge's box, our resource again, this is generally what the stickers will look like, and the envelope that these items will go into. Another reason, right, you want to get a look at these resources ahead of time, so that, especially if you're working the polls and for the first time as a judge of election or an inspector, you don't want to be super surprised by what you find inside that box. And here's the declaration form for someone who is going to spoil their mail-in ballot. The voter signs the front, and the judge of elections signs the back. All right, so situation 5 of the 6 that we're going through in this session. So voting provisionally, which this hasn't changed at all, except that a main source of provisional voters in this election is going to be those folks who applied to vote by absentee or mail-in and are not spoiling those ballots. on election day. But there are a lot of reasons for folks to vote provisionally. This includes if the voter is registered and in the correct polling place, but not in the poll books, right? We went through that a little bit earlier. If the voter is registered, but not in the correct polling place, we do want to urge people to get to their correct polling place, the correct division. If they possibly can, use the voting machine there. But if they can't or they won't, they can vote a provisional at your division. If you can't confirm anywhere that the voter's not registered, they should still be given a provisional ballot. Just because you check online and you can't find their voter registration record does not mean that they're not actually registered in the system. So provisional ballots are a safeguard to make sure no one slips through the cracks, and we do not want anyone to turn around and walk home without voting when they believe that they're a registered voter. If the voter doesn't have the required ID, if they're a first-time voter, I don't think this happens very often because there's a long list of photo and non-photo IDs that are acceptable. And then if a voter, again, applied for mail-in ballot but did not bring both the ballot and the declaration of an envelope, they're going to have to vote a provisional. The last item being if they're using in Philadelphia, the Express Vote XL, and they spoil the paper ballot on that machine 3 times, they'll have to vote a provisional after that. So lots of reasons here. So we're not going to go through actually step by step the procedure for voting provisional ballot, but it's listed here. The poll worker resources, the ones that are available online, available for pickup at 70's office. It's also listed, in very detailed on PhiladelphiaVotes.com in the election board guide. There's a 50-page guide for Philadelphia poll workers. Frankly, if you live and work in another county, it would probably be similarly helpful to look through. And if you study these steps ahead of time, I think you'll be just fine. And then, I've heard other poll workers stress this, like at the beginning of the day, everything's kind of new, and you're going through these procedures, but you're going to be administering multiple provisionals. You're going to be spoiling multiple mail-in and absentee ballots. And after the first several, the rest will go more smoothly. So I'll definitely pause again here for questions that are coming in. And then, Peggy, any kind of insights or, quirks that have come up when you've seen provisional ballots administered in the past?
Oh, it's been very time consuming and slow, and they need a space to do it secretly, not secret, with a certain amount of privacy. So make sure that you have a table set up for provisional ballots. I think that's going to be more important this time than ever.
Yeah, especially in a crowded polling place. Yeah. Okay, so if there aren't more questions coming in here, we'll plow along. Again, anatomy of the judge's box. There are going to be listed the various items that are needed for the provisional voting process. Take a look at this ahead of time. Don't let it take you by surprise. And then again, these are the steps that we're not going to go through one by one this afternoon, but would certainly urge you to take a look at before polls open. And then lastly, with regards to our voter procedure flow, right, there are a number of possibilities at the bottom of the chart where someone will vote provisional, but this is not the exhaustive list. Point of emphasis here again that if someone's at the polling place and you can't find in the book or whatever the reason is, we cannot let folks go home who believe they're registered voters without casting a ballot. So that is why that provisional ballot safeguard is there. Last situation, spoiling machine ballots. So if a voter uses the Express Vote XL, this is a digital face making selections, they hit a button and it's going to kick out on the right-hand side a copy of their paper ballot. Now, this is actually their official record of their choices. And this is it's on the stress. It is actually very, very important that voters review the selections on that piece of paper. It's not particularly easy to see, but they need to take a close look as best they can. Make sure that the selections from the machine match up to what's on that piece of paper. We have absolutely no expectation whatsoever that there will be discrepancies between what's on the machine and what's on the piece of paper. With the exception of I've heard there have been a couple of machines in past elections where maybe like the buttons were like a little uncalibrated. But otherwise, it's important that voters make sure that their intent is properly recorded. Number one. These paper ballots are used in a statistical audit after the election to make sure the results are as we think they are. And then thirdly, in the event of a recount, it is these paper ballots that are actually counted, not the results that come out of the electronic machine. So it's very important that folks actually review that ballot before they cast it. And similarly to the absentee or mail-in ballot spoiling, there's stickers here and there's an envelope that the ballot goes into when they do this. So very, very briefly, if someone were to, towards the end of their voting session and before, the piece of papers come out, it has their selections on it, or at least some of their selections. If they don't hit the vote button, if they hit the cancel voting session button, a little indicator will go off on the voting machine. The machine inspector will have to come in and enter a code that only the machine inspector would have. They're going to ask the voter the reason for them canceling their voting session. And at that point, the piece of paper, the voter's ballot, the voter's paper ballot is ejected. Voting machine inspector needs to take care not to look at that piece of paper. The voter, not the machine inspector, will take that piece of paper, that ballot, over to, it could be like wherever the provisional ballots are being kind of organized and administered by the judge of elections, as Peggy noted. There needs to be some area in the polling place where people can do these things privately. The voter's given a marker. They're going to mark out their selections on that piece of paper, the barcodes on that paper ballot, and then they're going to get a sticker to put on it. It's going to say spoiled ballot on it. That spoiled ballot goes into an envelope. After they do that, they have to go back to the check-in table where they're going to put S1 for spoil by their admission number. After they do that, they can sign the poll book and then go on to use the next voting machine. So there are a number of steps here. This is not going to happen all that often, but these systems are still quite new. This is only their third election being used, and so some folks will be seeing them for the first time, which may spur at least a few additional voters going through that machine process. So that takes us through the critical procedures, and we have at least 10 minutes here. We will stay on for longer, hopefully, and Lauren and Peggy don't have super hard stops at 12 o'clock noon, but we welcome questions both on the procedures we went through and anything else related to the polling places or working the polls on Tuesday, because there have been a great many questions to ask as we get ready for this election.
Somebody asked the question, what is needed to pick up a resource packet from the Committee of 70 offices, proof of working or ID? Like, no, we're not checking those. You can just come and we'll hand them to you, and as many as you'd like. So just as long as you come in those hours that we posted earlier, I can post them again, just so everyone has them. What if someone requests assistance but didn't bring someone to help them and are not in the book as needing assistance?
Yeah, so I guess I'll note first, like there are some rules around who can help. I mean, the judge of elections is not allowed to provide assistance. Someone's employer or their union official are not allowed to provide assistance. There are going to be some number of city rovers, folks. These are volunteers, well, not volunteers, are getting paid, who are working on behalf of the city. They'll be outside the polling places. Those folks are not supposed to provide assistance, but pretty much anyone else can. I mean, ideally, like folks are bringing a friend, a neighbor, family member with them. But if that's not possible, that they can bring just another voter with them to help. I think the one caution I throw in there, and then I welcome Peggy's thoughts on this as well, is that I would strongly caution against canvassers, the partisan folks who are outside the polling place, handing out literature and urging people to vote for this person or that person, which is again completely legitimate, important part of the election process. I would not advise at all those people going in with voters. In fact, I would urge people for not to do that. But other folks at the polling place who would reasonably in a nonpartisan fashion help a voter, I guess those folks could be tracked down. But yeah, Peggy, what are your thoughts? This is a good question.
Also, the clerk and the minority inspector or majority inspector are all free to help them. True. Without, if everyone except the judge of elections. And in the past, that is often what we have done. There are just one or two situations where that has been necessary. So, and I would agree with you that the people promoting a certain candidate are probably not the best choice to, I think you were right to be strongly cautioned against that. But neighbors are fine. And then if they haven't brought anybody with them, of course, the clerk or the minority inspector, majority inspectors, I would go with.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Great question. All righty. What else is coming up, Lauren, either in the chat or in the Q&A?
We have another question about, is there any reason not to bring a magnifying glass to help people read the paper slip in the machine if needed?
I mean, I would say if you have one or you can get one or you're willing to bring it, I think that's a great idea. I think the
Make
one thing
sure
I
you
note
have
is like
wipes.
just make sure you're ready. Exactly, be ready to wipe that magnifying glass after each person uses it.
And let's see, more things are coming in. More people asking if they, how do they find out if they've been assigned to a polling site? So those, you would have been contacted by the Board of Elections. I'll drop the link again to sign up as a backup poll worker. There may be cancellations as early as, election morning, and they'll hopefully try to place people. If you're on that list, you'll be the first people contacted to fill those spots. But if you haven't been contacted by the Board of Elections at this point, it's very unlikely that you will receive a placement. Somebody else has a question relating to the helping question. Won't the clerks be busy doing other things? Is there a floater at the polls who can help?
That's a nice idea.
Yeah, I mean, there will be. I mean, there are probably going to be a lot of people at the polling places. There are going to be some number of nonpartisan volunteers with the Election Protection Coalition that's out there, largely led by Common Cause and ACLU. I think in the past, like generally, those volunteers have also been cautioned against providing assistance to voters. But if there are other folks like, and there are just going to be, I think, in many polling places, just like members of the community out there to observe or just provide an extra set of hands. If they clearly don't have a strong stake in the outcome that they are advocating for, explicitly at the polling place, I think any of those folks would be reasonable to help if someone did not bring someone with them.
Let's see.
I see there's a question, when will the judge of elections box be distributed? Is that the question? Yeah. In the past, the judge of elections would get a card mailed to their home, and they would have to show that card, and you can go anytime the weekend before the election to Spring Garden and Delaware Avenue to pick up the election box. You sign for it and turn in that card. That's how it has worked in the past.
Yep. And where can they find those, the locations and the?
Well, I thought it was always one place. It's just one place. You go to Delaware Avenue and Spring Garden, and that will be listed on the card that you get, which shows that you're the judge of elections and you're the one who should pick up the box.
Mm-hmm.
I thought they were going to be in multiple districts throughout the city.
I think that's another one we should double check. Because I mean, a lot has changed between November 2019, June 2nd, and this election.
Yeah. So
we'll confirm.
Information.
Yeah, it was a police. We'll get but they had been police stations, and there were a number spread throughout the city. But we'll get confirmation on that and drop it in the poll worker caucus.
Yeah.
Okay.
Another note on folks who are waiting to get placed, or folks who did get calls that you might have gotten a call weeks ago, and you said you're going to work on election day. I hope you're still ready to go. I understand, at least in Philadelphia, they're going to send out an email and potentially a letter as well confirming these placements. I guess if that letter's going out, it should be going out very soon, because when county boards of elections, including our city commissioners, have the authority by law to fill vacancies on their own, it's at the 5-day mark before the election. So that final and kind of official notice should be available for not just for the judge of elections, but for everybody very soon who's gotten placed. All right. What any other questions coming in?
Somebody actually just commented that it's the last page of the election guide that was distributed has the dates, times, locations of the judge of election pickup box, which does seem to be like the police stations throughout the city.
Got it. Okay.
How do we handle agitators who might show up at the polling place to intimidate voters?
Yeah. So great deal of concern around voter harassment and voter intimidation. In most instances, and especially, I mean, in more of our kind of parochial and local primary contests here in Philly, there's de-escalation is always the best tack. But if folks are disrupting or harassing or intimidating voters and not stopping their behavior, the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office is responsible for responding to, investigating, and potentially prosecuting those violations. I mean, voter intimidation is against the law. And there's a number. I guess if we can drop it in the chat, 215-686-9641. Again, that's 215-686-9641. It's the hotline for the DA's office. Their task force is actually operationalized now because of the early voting centers. And if someone's being disruptive or behaving in a manner that is, definitely voter harassment or intimidation, call that hotline, and they will zip people out there to address the situation. If there's a threat of violence or actual violence, well, like, again, we don't think this is likely at all. But if there's a threat of violence, that's 911. You skip over the DA's office and that's straight to the police.
All right. Do you know the reason why judges are not allowed to open the judges box until the day of elections or after they are picked up?
Well, I could take just kind of a guess, but Peggy, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I have to admit that we would open them on Monday, the day before the election, and we would add the tabs to the A through L books, which divide the alphabet. They're separate, and we would put the cards in alphabetical order. We would do a little bit of prep because Tuesday morning is so intense, and getting those things out of the way helped us be more efficient. So I'm sorry, I was a judge for a number of years, and I never knew that we were not allowed to open it.
You know what? That's not the first time I've heard that folks have done that before Election Day to kind of help get things set. This is not an official training with the Philadelphia City Commissioner's Office or any other county. This is purely an information session offered by 70 and poll workers. I think if that's something that's been helpful in the past, I don't think that's a bad idea. I mean, there are election materials in that box, which is why we're certainly not opening them or splashing them about the world ahead of time. But it is going to be, I guess, Peggy, certainly, as you know, very, very busy, and there's not a lot of time to open up and set up the polling place the morning of November 3rd. So, I think that's anyway, Peggy. I don't think y'all aren't the only election board that has done that, and it's going to be really important to get these polling places open at 7 o'clock on Election Day.
Yeah, so that included our getting an index box that we could flip through easily because the cards came, but it was limited to those two things. We really didn't go through anything else.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Mary Flournoy mentioned that she has whiteout available at their polling place, which is useful for if someone signs on the wrong line or writes the wrong number and stuff like that. Can you use whiteout in the poll book?
I never have.
Yeah, I feel like that's a question we'll try to run down as well, but I don't know if that would be advisable. But we'll try to run down an answer to that.
Okay, it seems like the questions have slowed down.
Okay, all right. Okay, great. Well, we're at a couple minutes over, and this is not the last session, right, Lauren? You've scheduled sessions every day through November 2nd. If demand really stays high and picks up, we maybe we'll throw a couple more in there. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, all these tools are available at wevote.70.org. And please encourage other folks who are working the polls on November 3rd to sign up for these sessions. You can go to the website there, get the resources, pick them up in their office, download them. And let's get these last minute questions ahead of Election Day. Thank you, Lauren, so much for scheduling these and keeping this project moving. And Peggy, for your insights and experience with us this afternoon.
You bet. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pat. Thanks for doing this. All right. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. See ya.